Welcome back to those who are rejoining us, and a brand new welcome to those who just joined us. My name is Saba Azeem. I am with the Protection of Civilians team, and we are here for the keynote speech with Mr. Shah Wali, who is the Deputy Director as well as the Head of Programs for the Danish Committee for Afghan Refugees, DACAAR, based in Kabul. Before I introduce him, just a few housekeeping notes. All sessions are being recorded, and these recordings will be made available on various social media channels, on our website, YouTube, so on. We encourage everybody to please engage actively with all our panelists. You can ask questions through the platform. Please take advantage of the networking opportunities available also via the platform. There are lots of additional resources available in the library. If you want to read up more, see more interesting videos. We also encourage you to publicize your participation with us. Ask us questions. If you're publicizing on Twitter, please use the hashtag PAX, PoC 2021, and if you can also tag PAX PoC. Other than that, I will move on to introducing the session. Unfortunately, we've all seen what unfolded in Afghanistan over the course of the summer, especially August. It was gruesome international failure at various levels. Unfortunately, even before this pullout, we saw more civilian casualties in Afghanistan as a result of the coalition forces and its allies than from terrorist entities like the Taliban or ISPK. And then, of course, we had the pullout in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it was the brunt of everything was borne by the civilians. So here to discuss more about the civilian perspective, as well as the civil society perspective, we have Shah Wali, who, like I said, is the Deputy Director, Head of Program for DACAAR. He graduated from the Afghan Institute of Technology in 1979 from Kabul and gained a bachelor's degree in civil engineering in Pakistan. He was a part of the Afghan Mujahideen fighting for 10 years against the Russians. And in 1999, he joined DACAAR, which is a non-political, non-governmental, non-profit humanitarian organization working to improve the lives of Afghan people since 1984. He started his career within DACAAR as a field engineer and moved up managing the eastern provinces as a program manager for water supply program and is now the head of program. And he's also a person who taught me tremendously during the formative years of my career. So I'm very glad that he's joining us live. Hi, Shah Wali, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum, Sabah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
It's my pleasure to be with you in this session, yes.
It is our pleasure, and we are very honored that you're joining us. And we're very thankful that you're joining us from Kabul. I would start right away with the question and answers that we have for you. Like I said, we saw civilians bear the brunt of the NATO-led Operation Resolute support mission when it pulled out of Afghanistan. How do you think civilians could have been better protected during this rather hasty pullout?
Sorry, first of all, I'm not part of any political parties.
Of course.
This is one.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever I am saying, that it should be very clear, frank, and straightforward.
Indeed.
Indeed, yes. And all these, whatever I am saying, it is my personal thinking.
Definitely.
And it's the reality as well.
Yes.
The whole evacuation of the military from Afghanistan was not planned properly first.
Right.
The civilians were not aware of anything what will happen. And it was not communicated even with those who are willing to evacuate with the military forces together with it. There were many people who got even the SIV documents. We were waiting for that. And the bad thing, when the military planes came to the airport in Kabul, some stuff was taken on board without any documentation, even without any passport or any legal documents. And when they were boarded and the plane left the Kabul airport, some sort of rumors spread out through media that the military troops are taking all these guys, and everybody was rushing to the airport without any documents. And even in many cases, people were showing, instead of passport and visa, they were showing their bill of electricity. It means things were not planned properly, and the civilians were not aware of anything, what will happen. Many people rushed to the airport, and whatever happened in that airport, that was not a good situation. For many years, civilians were waiting there. That was one part of the evacuation. The second thing, even the military forces and our ex-government did not share the real information with the civilian, what will happen. In many cases, people were thinking it happened too early. Even Taliban were not ready to take control. They were waiting outside Kabul and not willing to enter. But when the evacuation and the gap of power occurred in Kabul, then they discussed even with the US to enter even to the presidential palace and to Kabul city and take the control. But still, civilians suffered too much on those days. The first thing, they were rushing to the airport without any documents and without any plan that they will be boarded and they will be evacuated. But nothing happened. And the first 5-6 plane, it happened. They took some people without any documentation, but the rest, they were waiting there. And that bad incident which occurred, there was a big number of civilian casualties in the airport as well.
Right, yes.
That was not planned. And even the better thing, if they were announcing and even communicating properly with those who were even fulfilling the requirement of evacuation. Yes. Even many experts from different countries, when they were here, their own embassies were not able to evacuate them. And there was no plan and nothing proper. And even our ex-president and his cabinet left the country without any announcement, without any plan, pre-plan, and that create a huge stress. Still, the civilians are suffering. And it was not planned even from the US embassy and other embassies. Later on, it was a little bit coordinated through the Qatar embassy in Kabul. But still, there are many civilians who are willing to be evacuated. They are going to Pakistan, they are going to Iran, they are going to Uzbekistan, to a third country to be evacuated. Still, civilians here, especially the media people and some of our security forces staff,
yes,
they are still thinking that they should be evacuated. They are under stress.
No, this resonates quite well. Well, we've seen the concept of protection of civilians was, traditionally seen as protecting civilians from hostile armed groups. But over the years, we've seen the concept evolve to also include protecting civilians from your own action. And we saw in 2017 that the US military relaxed its rules of engagement for airstrikes in Afghanistan, which unfortunately, since 2017, of course, led to massive civilian casualties. And as a result, we saw more Afghans killed by NATO and its coalition forces as opposed to armed groups like Taliban or IS. How do you think military actors can better incorporate protecting civilians from their own actions in a meaningful way in their practices?
The problem here, Sari, in this country, even in the time of the coming and the time of when in 2001 and 2 when the military forces were arriving to Afghanistan, there was no clear TOR for them, sorry. neither from their own countries and nor from our UN Security Council. The military forces in Afghanistan were just protecting themselves, sorry. If there was any attack on them, they were killing everybody when they were visible or even not visible. And the airstrike, when they were getting the false and fake reports, they were bombing the whole village and the whole area. And in that sense, there was no court in Afghanistan to make them accountable. And even there was no clear TOR in their own country when they were coming here. We had a big dilemma in that.
Yep.
Even our own security forces, the Afghan security forces, were also not keen about protecting the civilians. The Taliban or the armed opposition group, they were also not trained, they were not also aware of how important the civilian casualties are for the human being. There were no clear TOR, there were no awareness, there were no training for them, and they were not accountable at all. My suggestion, anybody who is going in this mission, a mission like this one, there should be a clear TOR from UN Security Council or from even from NATO and or even from the US Army. The problem here, people were just thinking they should be alive. If anybody else is killed, that's not an issue. But only the guys who are here with the name of military forces or resolute support or whatever we should call them, they were protecting themselves and they were not keen about protecting anybody else. The same thing happened with when Taliban was doing any attack, complex attack or whatever, explosion or this BBID or SVBID, whatever BBID. They were just thinking that the target should be targeted if civilians are there or not. And in that case, it means there was no one to take responsibility about civilian. There was UNAMA. UNAMA was even not reporting in the first many years. You were not allowed to report about civilian casualties. Later on, they were allowed to report on the civilian casualties. You are right. There were less number of civilian casualties from the other groups rather than our own security forces and the NATO alliance and their military forces.
I think you touched a very important point on this lack of training. Do you think the civil society can also play a role in training these, international operations and international forces?
100%. I will give you a live example. That's not a good example. In 2009, I went to Denmark. The Danish soldier was for training there to come to Helmand. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there was no Pashto teacher to teach them Pashto. The guy who was teaching them was a Dari teacher, sorry. Then I told them, I made them those guys that definitely training is very important, awareness, this whatever traditional and culturally sensitive things, these things are very important. And the other thing, sorry, there should be a court, even not in Afghanistan, for example, but there should be a court, for example, a Hague anti-criminal court to keep these people accountable. Otherwise, everybody will do whatever they want to do.
And unfortunately, we've seen them do whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, they use the mother of bombs and Nangarhar. Those plants are not green so far, and everything is dried there. Even the community people, they are suffering still. The newborn children in that area is incomplete. They have some problem with their legs and with their hands and with their mind and everything. Yes.
I think you're bringing up a very important point on these reverberating effects on civilian harm. So it's not just the civilian casualties or the people who've unfortunately lost their lives, but these long-lasting effects that continue even after the attack or the incident has happened. My next question is that monitoring agencies like Air Wars have estimated that in the last 20 years alone, between 4,800 and 6,800 Afghan civilians have died as a result of this US-led airstrikes in Afghanistan. So how do you think, you also touched upon the concept of accountability. So how do you think these international security actors, including NATO or these coalition missions, need to be held to account in a more meaningful way so that the civilians and their sort of issues are also resolved?
I will not be agree with this figure. This is the minimum one, sorry.
Definitely.
Many casualties in the rural communities are not reported at all to anyone. First, they were not willing to report that, and second, there was no one to count them. It means these figures are 10 times more practically, or at least 3 times more.
Definitely.
I'm from a very rural area, and I have a local information about these casualties from all over the countries. The meaningful things are any military mission who are going to anywhere, sorry. First, there should be a protocol. Yes. And they should sign that, they should be accountable for that. And I think it is mainly the responsibility of the Security Council. And we should keep them accountable as well, sorry. So far, there were many cases, even the Hague Court was trying to do investigation in Afghanistan, but they were not allowed to do the investigation, whatever happened in Afghanistan. Things like that, it is very important that the Security Council of UN should have a vital role on these things. And there should be strict rules, sorry, otherwise, in many cases, many people were killed, and you were saying after a week, you were accepting that we made a mistake and we are human being, and this is the things that it happened, and we accepted, we will give them the cost of a living, but there is no cost per life, sorry.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Compensation, financial compensation cannot really compensate for the loss of life.
No.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, we've often also seen policymakers at a very, they're very distant from actual civilians on the ground, and their realities, what they face every day, the realities that you're also sharing with us. So how do you think these civilian experiences should be incorporated in these policies in order to better protect civilians? So first of all, the important point Shah Wali's brought up is that civilians were not informed of the pullout at all. They were not informed by the coalition forces. They were not informed by the Afghan security forces. They were not informed by their own political parties, by their own leaders. At the same time, even embassy staff or national staff working with these coalition forces were not involved, were not even informed of this pullout and how hasty it was, leading, of course, to this massive confusion, which I think only led to a lot more confusion. And of course, we saw very gruesome pictures appear from Kabul back in August. And like Shah Wali said, there were no mechanisms to share this information with civilians, which led to throngs of people going to Kabul airport. And then, of course, the unfortunate bombing at Kabul airport as well, which claimed over 200 lives. We saw many people get on planes without evacuation, get on planes for evacuation, whereas those with actual documents who were waiting to be evacuated are unfortunately still waiting. Many activists, many people working for human rights organizations or who were reporting on human rights abuses have, they've unfortunately gone in hiding, which means that as their employers, as the international community, I think it's a failure on multiple levels. He also talked very clearly about this lack of accountability, especially of international forces. There being no courts in Afghanistan to hold them to account. There being no clear TORs to hold them to account. There being no proper rules of engagement. And also the failure of the UN and the Security Council in establishing these rules of engagement, in establishing how to hold these actors to account, I think was a major gap that at least, again, civilians bore the brunt of it for the last 2 decades. And despite multiple entities like Air Wars, for instance, reporting on civilian casualties, of course, the numbers were very limited. As you've seen, this is the capital city Shah Wali is joining us from, where the internet connections and connectivity can be such a problem. So you can imagine what it's like for, let's say, in rural Afghanistan, how difficult this connectivity problem is. So there's mass underreporting of all these civilian casualties. So the conservative estimate of about 6,800 is also a very limited one. And then, of course, there were no clear rules of engagement either. So while we're waiting for hopefully get established connectivity with Shah Wali again, we have a question from the audience from Mala Keenan. If you would ask it, please. Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So knowing what you know about being a protection advisor, like what could you tell us, like if your family was experiencing this, what would you want to see happening? Oh, okay, sorry, I'm being told to repeat it.
Yes.
So as a protection activist yourself, if your family was experiencing something like this, what would you like to see done?
I think this lack of information sharing, that confusion, what is happening, what is not happening, I think not knowing causes a lot more confusion, which caused all these people panicking. And in that state of panic, the way people rush to the airports, the way people rush to the borders, and not knowing what to do, I think definitely was one of the biggest gaps. So if I'm in such a position with my family, I would definitely like to know what is happening, who's doing what, and all these forces. Whether it is it's the foreign military mission in my country, it's my own government, it's my own security forces. In also what plans are there if I am an employee of these forces or of embassies, of these international entities, UN agencies, international organizations. They also have a responsibility to protect me and my family. So what is their duty of care? They need to be made very, very clear. Because by the end of the day, they also need to protect. They are there to protect civilians, and like Shah Wali also said, if they were concerned more with their own protection, and we've seen in Afghanistan the whole aid complex and aid agencies, international forces living in these compounds, showing that they're scared of civilians rather than there to protect them, I think also gives a very stark message to civilians, which is not a very pleasant one, unfortunately. Any other questions from the audience while we're waiting for Shah Wali? Yes, we have a question from Mark Gerlasco. And also to share with everybody, he was one of the persons who set up the civilian casualty unit at UNAMA.
Thank you, Saba. I'm curious, when we look at the situation currently in Afghanistan, particularly the issue of the potential starvation that we're going to see, and the international community holding back funds, primarily at the behest of the United States, how can we best balance the security issue with providing funds to the Afghan people so that they get food and necessary services while not providing money to terrorist elements?
I think that's a very important question, because even in cases like Syria, we've seen the issue of aid diversion and then donors being extremely skeptical in not funding just because of that. But and I agree, that is a very big risk, but that does not mean that we then let an entire population starve and not get the basic needs that they deserve. Again, I think there need to be agreements also within the neighboring countries so that these essential goods and services can cross borders. Unfortunately, at least from the end of Pakistan, I can say it's been done rather haphazardly. So I think the international community also needs to lobby with these neighboring countries, because then they also have a right to their neighboring countries. There are still lots of civil society organizations very much active in Afghanistan. And they're doing a very good job. Even previously, they've done a very good job, especially, even organizations like DACAAR. And they have very good access in the field. They have very good access in extremely remote areas as well. So, coming into contact with them and really ramping up the humanitarian response to ensure that at least the basic needs of food, water, shelter are being met. Winters are very harsh in Afghanistan as well, and of course we'll see that progress in the next few weeks as well. So those needs, I think, definitely need to be met. Mark, this also like a personal opinion. The way NGOs are audited, whether it's financial and programmatic, and I'm in favor of that. They need to be audited. Why aren't we auditing these international military missions there? Why aren't we auditing where their finances went and what was the impact of their program, so to speak? Because what we've seen in the last 20 years, billions of dollars being spent. What is the impact then? We've seen massive failure and nothing else. So, at one point, yes, they're being very careful with aid diversion. But then I think we also need to hold them to account. What happened the last 20 years? What was your impact? Any other question? And I'm hearing from the technical team that the connection's back, so we can definitely continue with the actual expert on screen. Shah Wali, can you hear us? Yeah.
Sorry, Saba, somebody called from your conference.
Well, see, as there are alternative ways to work around. There is a solution for every problem. We just need to be creative with it. Shah Wali, in your opinion, what do you think were the three main successes and failures of the international military mission in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades?
I should not say that it was the success of the military only.
Yes.
Because billions of dollars were also supported from other countries beside the military.
Right.
We should not give all the success credit to the military. It is the combination of everything.
Yes.
The important one was the attendance of the students to the schools. It was increased 10 times, sorry.
Wow.
And 40% of that was girls.
Yes.
It means that was a good. However, there was a question about the quality of the education.
Yeah.
But quantity-wise, the number of students increased 10 times. The number of universities, if it was government universities or private, it increased dramatically.
Right.
The guys, they got a very good education. Many of them became master, bachelor, and I remember in my time, the highest degree in Afghanistan was bachelor degree, and then the BSc and baccalaureate. Those degrees were common, but nowadays there are many PhDs as well.
Wow.
The other thing was this mobile companies. That was a big revolution. I remember when we were willing to call somebody outside, you were going to Pakistan or Iran. Now there are very good mobile companies. They are working even in a very remote places. That was a big success. However, the cost was an issue. But still, these access roads, the road condition in Afghanistan was too bad. Now we have a very good roads. However, some of the culverts and the roads are destroyed back in the fighting. But still, that's a very good thing and a very positive change. They have access. There are very nice paved roads to very remote provinces and districts. That's very good. From my point of view, then the electricity is another big thing, sorry. Even we have supplied electricity from our neighbor countries, but still it is supporting the economy and the things in Afghanistan. This was not only the military. This was the support from the aid community and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from my point of view, they were very, very important progress. Yes. And the other thing was things were digitalized. Sorry, and that was the requirement. Even our soldiers, they were registered digitally. Their data was there, and their biometric was there, and everything. The paperwork was decreased really.
So you've mentioned most of the successes, I think, more from the aid community and something from the corporates, and I see nothing really coming from the military missions. But what about the failures?
Speaking frankly, sorry, there was no good support from the military, because military were seen as occupiers and invaders.
Right.
The ordinary Afghans were not looking them at a support source or a security forces. Sorry.
No, most definitely. And if like we saw these various aid compounds that they lived in, of course, it seemed like they were being threatened from civilians rather than being there to protect them.
Yes.
I have a question from an anonymous viewer who's asking, what is the status of UNAMA? Most of their staff have either left the country or are in hiding. Are they able to do any human rights monitoring today?
Sorry, the UN, they were giving a full support. And they were asked that all UN organization, even if they are based in the city, they should move to the UN compound. That's called UNOCA compound. Mm-hmm. Even the civilian supporters like ECO and other UN agencies who are in the city in Kabul, they were asked to go there, but majority of the staff, they were evacuated to the neighbor countries. And they are trying still. There is a protection cluster very active. Mm-hmm. Protection, there are many clusters like health and nutrition and WASH and support security and agriculture, and protection cluster is another cluster. And they are there, but their presence is reduced dramatically. Mm. Yeah.
And these monitoring of human rights abuses, for instance, like you're saying, has been reduced drastically.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I would also like to ask the audience if they have any more questions. Our online audience, our in-person audience. I see an expert from Iraq wants to ask a question. Yes, please.
Hello. Hello. So the question is to Mr. Shah Wali, the civilians' harms. As a solution, do we suggest a checklist, for instance, between both the military side or security side and the civilians? Who will represent the civilians if they will be a checklist between both sides? And how we gonna kind of have that agreement as a solution if we suggest it and accept it? Thank you.
If you can hear me, yes. There should be a checklist for both. Mm-hmm. Definitely. For the trained people, it is easier. But for the uneducated civilian, it is a little bit complicated. Because all civilians in Afghanistan are not educated. Most of them are uneducated. And the checklist can be, but there should be like this UNAMA.
Yes.
Their role is to do that business. But the problem here in Afghanistan, everybody was restricted and their movement was restricted. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Everyone was just relying on the reports. Physically, it was too difficult for them to go and check and see what is going on. There was no, the fact check was not there to check what is happening and what has happened. Because in many cases, the casualty reports were completely different, what the reporting agency was reporting and what the other were saying, sorry. And in that case, definitely there should be a checklist, especially, and the military people should be made accountable for their actions, sorry. If they are not accountable, whatever they have done in these 20 years in Afghanistan, they should not repeat that anywhere else.
I think this ties very nicely into our theme for day 2, which is accountability of these military actions, especially how civilians can hold them to account as well. The next question we have for you is, what is the status of women's rights currently in Afghanistan? We've seen their removal from public space completely by the Taliban. Is there any update on what the actual reality is on the ground?
At the first days, they announced officially that the female staff should not come to the offices and they should not even work. But later on, when we continue the discussion, the UN women, they were active, and the HCR, our humanitarian coordinator, they were very active. They hold many meetings at a high level, and we as an NGO, we had more meetings in the provincial and regional levels. Gradually, we got permission for our female staff to work, but they put 2 conditions, Taliban, sorry. Mm-hmm. One is each female staff should have a mahram.
Yes.
And the second, the woman should be with hijab. It means that they should not, the clothing should not be against our culture and Sharia law. Those 2 things, they put that, and for the government organization, they are still saying that they will give salary to the female staff who are at their homes. But they are looking for a time, even for the girls above class 6. Mm-hmm. And 8 provinces across the country, they allow them, their schools are open, but not in all in the country. The primary schools up to class 6 for girls are open across the country, but only in 8 provinces. Wow. Girls can go to school above class 6 up to class 12. And the private universities, female students can go, but there are a partition in some cases, and in some cases they have divided the classrooms. A separate classroom for female students and a separate for male students. The civil society organization, especially the woman-led organization, they are still very active, trying their best. But it will take time, I think.
Most definitely, most definitely.
Yes. But we have a very good map across the country, our NGOs and the civil society organization, where we have permission, full permission, that all female staff can work, they can do the assessment, they can reach to the beneficiaries and everything. No. But in some places we have not a full permission, but seeming with conditions, yes.
Right. No, that's,
but it is improving. It is improving.
That's very good to hear that it's improving, and at least civil society, women working in civil society do have that or are creating that access. We've also often seen policymakers be quite distant from the field realities and the realities that civilians like you face on a daily basis in Afghanistan. How do you think these civilian experiences can be incorporated into policy level in order to better protect civilians?
There should be a real information from the ground.
Yes.
And they should be collected by the civil society organization operating on the ground. Mm-hmm. I'm not referring everything to UNAMA because they have their own restrictions as well.
Yes.
But there are other civil society organizations on the ground, even up, and the past it was on the district level as well. And they should be consulted, sorry. The problem we had in Afghanistan so far in these 20 years, all the policies were made outside Afghanistan.
Yes.
And the models which was brought were used somewhere in other countries that might be successful in those countries, but those policies did not work in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And that was one of the weaknesses of our failure as well. Because all policies were made outside. And the real workers on the ground were not involved at all. Even whatever system, our banking system, the tax systems, these things were copied from somewhere, which was not working 100%, yes.
I think we have time for one last question. Somebody from either the in-person audience or online. Yep.
Hi, Saba.
But you-
And Shah Wali, very nice to have the opportunity to speak with you. And I want to thank you for the generosity of your knowledge that you've shared today. I have a bit of a prickly question, so I hope it doesn't confound you too much. When we speak about the protection of civilians and the difficulty in discerning the civilian versus someone with ill intent, how does that complicate the picture in how we define who is receiving the protection and whose protection needs to be asserted or prioritized?
I think in Afghanistan, nobody is protected, sorry. Even our ex-president was not protected. He left the country in 30 minutes, sorry. If he was protected, he will not do that. Civilians in Afghanistan are not protected at all, sorry. Even the activists are not protected. How about the ordinary ones? The issue here is, first, our constitution were very nice constitution in this region, but that was not followed and not applied at all. And there should be a Supreme Court or whatever to follow on the constitution. If constitution is not applied, all laws will not be applied at all. The problem here, there were many laws in Afghanistan for protection of civilians, for protection of minorities, for protection of this and that. But there was no one to follow on that. The main thing is it's better to have law for everything. But if that law is not followed and not implemented, it means that's not working.
Thank you very much for your...
The only thing that we got used to this tough situation, that's we are resilient, sorry to say. Otherwise, if somebody else were instead of Afghans, even the reports are showing 75% of Afghans have problem mentally. That's right, sorry.
Yes.
But we are still stronger. And this bad situation, we are trying to survive. We are trying to support our ordinary Afghans who need our support, and still we are hoping for the future.
No, I think the resilience of Afghans really need to be commended. I've seen it firsthand. I would like to thank you very much once again for engaging us in this very open and honest discussion and sharing your brilliant insights with us.
But you have not asked the failures, sorry. You are just asking.
The failures, please. Please.
The problem here, sorry. First of all, our security forces collapsed in 11 days, sorry. It means the investment on our security forces were wasted. The second thing, the guys who are on power, majority, 90% of them has a second citizenship. Their families were not in Afghanistan. And they were not keen and loyal to the country, sir. The problem in the last moment, the ex-president had a staff already left the country. His minister was not in the country. His defense minister, his chief of the army staff, and everybody was not in the country because their families were not living here. And they left the country very quickly. The other things, this military, when they came here, when they were leaving, there was a big brain drain as well. All the qualified Afghans, they were trying to leave the country and still they have not reached to their real destination. They are still in the neighboring countries, and some reach to US and some reach to the West. And our banks collapse overnight, our security forces collapse overnight. And all these are failures, sir. It means things were not, everything was artificially made, sir. Even our economy was artificially made. We were selling on a weekly basis around $100 million to buy apps to keep the currency. But that was artificial, sir. Things were very much artificial, sir. There were buildings constructed by these military forces in Helmand with millions of dollars, but that was not used by a single person for one day, and they destroyed back. A building and a military base with more than $300 million were constructed, not used by anyone, and destroyed in one night.
Wow.
It means the investment was done on wrong way.
No, I think this gives us a lot of food for thought. And in the next session, we will engage with 3 more speakers who discuss their experiences from Afghanistan and what lessons can be learned. I thank you once again, Shah Wali, for joining us, and also the audience for joining us. We will have a short break for about 10 minutes before we rejoin with the other session. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shah Wali.
Thank you.